UFO abducted in Sedona, Arizona. Loss of time. UFO Chronicles Chapter 1. Lost time. The desert's unyielding stillness was interrupted by the hum of Larry's old truck, its engine a testament to many a Sedona sunset it had seen. The truck wound its way along the road, flanked by the red rock formations that were almost glowing in the dimming light. The day at the hardware store had been particularly grueling, with tourists preparing for a local festival and residents stocking up for the weekend. All Larry could think of was sinking into his recliner with a cold beer. Larry hummed along to the tunes from the radio, his weary eyes squinting at the rapidly darkening horizon. The beauty of Sedona never ceased to amaze him, but today, all he sought was the comfort of his bed. As he rounded a bend, a curious flicker of light caught his attention. Probably some campers, he mused. But as he continued, the light grew steadily brighter, more intense, bathing the road in an unnatural, bluish hue. Larry, instinctively, squinted, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter. He fumbled for the radio, thinking perhaps this was some bizarre interference, but the songs played uninterrupted. The light intensified, engulfing everything around him. The truck's engine started sputtering, its faithful hum replaced by an eerie silence. Larry's heart raced as he desperately tried restarting the engine to no avail. The blinding light seemed to pull him, hypnotic and all-encompassing. He could barely make out shadows dancing at the periphery of his vision, and a cold, numbing sensation enveloped him. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The last thing he remembered was a sensation of floating, being lifted from his seat, and then darkness. Larry awoke with a start, his shirt soaked in sweat. He was back in his truck, the familiar purr of its engine comforting his frayed nerves. The radio announcer cheerfully discussed the morning's weather. Morning? He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It blinked 7:30 a.m. back at him. His mind raced. He distinctly remembered leaving the store at 9 p.m. The drive home was routine, only half an hour. So why was he just reaching his driveway at 7:30 in the morning? Shaking off the rising panic, Larry parked his truck and tried to make sense of things. The vivid images of blinding lights and strange sensations seemed like fragments of a bad dream. Yet, his truck's clock and the daylight around him were undeniable. Where had he been all night? Why couldn't he remember? Entering his home, Larry hoped to find solace in its familiar surroundings. But the walls seemed to close in on him, every shadow a lurking figure. He could hear the deafening thud of his heart and a dull ringing in his ears. He needed to freshen up. As the cold water from the tap splashed onto his face, he looked up into the mirror. A man in his early 50s stared back, graying hair, deep-set eyes, and right now, those eyes were clouded with a confusion Larry had never seen before. Suddenly, a surge of fragmented memories assailed him. Images of being on a table, cold metallic instruments, and strange beings with large black eyes observing him. Larry's knees buckled, and he found himself on the bathroom floor, clutching the sides of the sink for support. No, it couldn't be real. It was just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. Maybe he had pulled over to rest and lost track of time. It was the only explanation that made sense. But the fear gnawing at his gut told a different story. Larry knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He needed to confide in someone. And there was only one person in town he trusted enough with something this bizarre: his old friend and barber, Mike. As he reached for the phone to dial Mike's number, Larry hoped against hope that he'd find some answers, any answer that wasn't as terrifying as the fragmented memories threatening to shatter his sanity. Chapter 2. Whispers of Memory. Larry stumbled into his kitchen, mind still a swirling mess from the fragments of memories flooding back. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, hoping the liquid courage might steady his nerves and silence the storm in his head. He took a deep gulp, relishing the burning sensation as it slid down his throat. In his living room, he sank into his recliner, trying to focus. The more he tried to recall, the murkier the memories became. Flashes of cold metal, blinding lights, and alien figures watching him continued to emerge. And that sensation of weightlessness. Was it possible that he'd been taken somewhere? He was snapped out of his contemplation by a knock on the door. He opened it to find a concerned Mike, who immediately noticed Larry's disheveled appearance. "Got your call," Mike began, "and you sounded off. Figured I'd come over." Larry nodded, leading Mike inside. They'd been friends since childhood, sharing everything from schoolyard secrets to adult hardships. But this, Larry didn't even know where to begin. Mike settled on the couch opposite Larry, his eyes scrutinizing his friend. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "What happened, Larry?" Taking a deep breath, Larry began recounting the events, starting with his drive home. As he described the blinding light, the failed engine, and the fragments of memories returning, Mike's skeptical eyebrows arched higher and higher. When Larry finished, there was a palpable silence. Mike rubbed his temples, searching for words. "You think you were taken? By aliens?" Larry's voice quivered. "I know how it sounds, Mike, but I can't explain the lost time. And these memories, they feel too real." Mike sighed, running his fingers through his graying hair. "Look, you were exhausted, it was late. Maybe you pulled over and dozed off? As for the dreams, nightmares happen." But Larry shook his head, desperation in his eyes. "No, Mike. This wasn't just some nightmare. I've had those. This was different." Mike leaned forward, concern evident. "Okay, let's say for a moment, hypothetically, that what you're saying is true. What do you want to do about it?" Larry blinked, taken aback. I don't know. I just needed to tell someone. I'm not crazy, Mike." Mike nodded, a supportive hand on Larry's shoulder. "Never said you were. But it's a lot to digest. Let's think this through. For starters, any signs of, anything? Bruises? Marks?" Larry hesitated, then began to roll up his sleeves. There, on his forearm, was a peculiar mark. Not a bruise or cut, but an intricate pattern, almost like a tattoo. Only, Larry had never gotten a tattoo in his life. Mike's eyes widened, staring at the symbol. "That's odd." He reached out to touch it, but Larry recoiled. "It tingles," Larry whispered, "like a low electric current." Mike looked more worried than skeptical now. "Okay, let's get you to a doctor. Maybe there's an explanation for all of this." Larry nodded. "But discreetly, Mike. I don't want the whole town thinking I've lost it." They decided on a local clinic, where Larry's friend, Dr. Sarah Miller, worked. Known for her discretion, Sarah was their best shot. As Mike drove Larry to the clinic, the weight of the mystery bore down on them, the car filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the unsettling whispers of memory echoing in Larry's mind. The sterile white walls of the clinic seemed to close in on Larry as he sat on the examination table. Sarah, after hearing Larry's account and studying the mark, looked deep in thought. She finally said, "I've never seen anything like this. It's not a burn or a regular skin condition. As for the sensation you described, I'm baffled." Mike chimed in. "Could it be a reaction to something? A bug bite, maybe?" Sarah shook her head. "No, it's too intricate. Too deliberate." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Larry, I don't know what happened to you last night, but I suggest you see a specialist." Larry's heart sank, the last shred of hope that this could be easily explained away, fading. "Who can I see? I don't want this becoming public." Sarah scribbled down an address. "Dr. Evelyn Roth. She's a dermatologist, but she's also studied unexplained phenomena. If anyone can help, it's her." Larry nodded, taking the piece of paper. The journey to uncovering the truth was just beginning, and the glimpses of memories, like puzzle pieces, were starting to fall into place, painting a picture that Larry feared to see completed. Chapter 3. The unveiling. The trip to Dr. Roth's office was filled with an eerie silence. Larry's grip on the steering wheel tightened with every mile, the unknown awaiting him filling his mind with a myriad of apprehensions. Nestled on the outskirts of Sedona, Dr. Roth's clinic was an unassuming building, its exterior betraying no hint of the esoteric knowledge held within. Larry parked, taking a deep breath. Mike, ever the supportive friend, clapped him on the back, offering a reassuring nod. Inside, the office was a blend of modern and rustic. The walls were adorned with both medical degrees and peculiar artifacts. An hourglass, filled with glimmering sands, caught Larry's eye. Its grains moved inconsistently, some fast, some lingering, almost as if time itself was distorted within it. A door opened, revealing a tall, elegant woman with piercing blue eyes. "Dr. Evelyn Roth. Mr. Lawrence?" Her voice was calm, soothing, but there was an underlying intensity to it. Larry nodded, standing. "Larry is fine." She beckoned them into her office, her gaze fixed on the mark on Larry's arm. Larry couldn't shake off the feeling that she'd seen something like this before. After the initial pleasantries, Larry recounted his experience. Dr. Roth listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When he finished, she sat in silence for a moment, seemingly collecting her thoughts. "I've come across a few cases with similar memory lapses," she began slowly, "but this mark, it's unlike anything I've documented." Mike interrupted, "So you believe him?" Dr. Roth met his gaze. "I've learned in my line of work to keep an open mind." She turned to Larry. The mind, when confronted with trauma, often shields itself. Memory lapses, fragmented recalls. It's the brain's defense mechanism. But this, she pointed to the mark, this is physical evidence. Evidence that's hard to ignore. Larry, voice shaking, asks, "Can you help me?" Dr. Roth paused, then responded, "I want to try something, Larry. It's a bit unconventional, but given your circumstances, it might just work." "Have you ever heard of regressive hypnosis?" Larry frowned. "You mean, like, bringing up past memories?" She nodded. "Exactly. It might help us piece together what happened during your missing hours." Mike looked skeptical. "Is that safe?" She reassured him. "It's simply a tool to help Larry access his subconscious memories. Think of it as a guided meditation." Larry hesitated for a moment, then gave a nod of approval. They moved to a dimly lit room, filled with plush chairs and the soothing scent of lavender. Dr. Roth instructed Larry to lie down, making him as comfortable as possible. As she began her rhythmic chant, Larry's eyelids grew heavy. The world around him faded as he descended into the labyrinth of his mind. A familiar blinding light met him. He was back on the road, the eerie blue glow enveloping his truck. But this time, there was more. He saw himself being lifted from his vehicle, his body seemingly weightless. He tried to fight, to scream, but an unseen force rendered him powerless. He was transported into a chamber, cold and sterile. There, those figures with haunting black eyes loomed over him, their long fingers moving in patterns in the air. The mark on his forearm began to take shape, each intricate detail being etched with precision. As the scene shifted, he found himself in another chamber. In front of him was a vast cosmic vista, a window to the stars. And there, floating amongst the constellations, was Earth, glowing brilliantly. The beings communicated, not with words, but with emotions. A deep sense of sadness and urgency washed over Larry. Suddenly, the vision jolted, a rush of memories flooding back. They showed him glimpses of their world, of other realms. They weren't invaders but explorers, their mission shrouded in mystery. But Larry sensed no malice, only desperation. As quickly as it began, the session ended. Larry's eyes fluttered open, Dr. Roth's face coming into focus. He was back in her clinic, the weight of his newfound memories pressing down on him. Mike, witnessing the entire process, looked both relieved and troubled. "Did it work?" he whispered. Larry sat up, taking a moment to gather himself. "I saw things, Mike. Incredible, terrifying things." Dr. Roth offered him a glass of water. "Take your time, Larry. Recalling memories like that can be overwhelming." Larry nodded, recounting the visions. When he finished, the room was once again heavy with silence. Dr. Roth finally spoke. "What you experienced, Larry, it's beyond anything I've seen. But you must remember, these beings, whatever their intention, chose to let you remember." Larry frowned. "Why? Why me?" She replied, "That's something only you can discover. But this mark, it's a piece of the puzzle. We need to decode its meaning." Mike, ever the protective friend, asked, "What's the next step?" Dr. Roth looked at Larry. "Are you willing to go further? To uncover the truth, no matter where it leads?" Larry took a deep breath, the weight of destiny upon him. "Yes. I need answers." As they left the clinic, the night sky overhead seemed vast and endless. And somewhere, amidst the stars, lay the answers to Larry's haunting questions. The journey had only just begun. Chapter 4. Echoes from the void. Larry's nights were no longer his own. Each time he closed his eyes, fragments of otherworldly landscapes danced behind his eyelids. Visions of vast galactic vistas, alien horizons, and the haunting black eyes that seemed to peer right into his soul. One evening, after a particularly vivid dream of floating among the constellations, Larry awoke with a start. The mark on his forearm throbbed, a pulsating rhythm that seemed to beckon him. The clock's luminous hands read 3:03 a.m. The world outside was quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of the wind. Drawn inexplicably, Larry found himself in his truck, driving the winding roads of Sedona with no particular destination in mind. As if guided by an invisible hand, he found himself near Cathedral Rock. Parking his truck, Larry was surprised to find the landmark bathed in an ethereal glow. He approached, each step filled with a sense of anticipation. At the base of the rock, he discovered an entrance. A cave that hadn't been there before, or at least, not one he had noticed. Pulled forward by an indescribable urge, Larry ventured inside. The cave was unlike any he'd ever seen. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and the deeper he went, the more the passage seemed to expand and retract, as if it were breathing. Along the path, strange hieroglyphs illuminated his way. They appeared similar to the mark on his arm. Lost in the hypnotic beauty of the glyphs, Larry barely noticed the chamber he stepped into. It was vast, an underground cathedral of sorts. At its center stood a monolithic stone slab, on top of which lay an artifact, a crystalline prism that pulsed with an inner light. As he approached, the mark on his arm resonated with the crystal's pulsations. Hesitating only for a moment, Larry touched the prism. A rush of images flooded his mind. Memories not his own, echoes from a time and place beyond his understanding. He saw a dying world, its once blue skies turned to ash. The same haunting figures, the Greys, desperate, as they launched arcs into the void. The journey through the cosmos, filled with hope and despair. And then, Earth. A beacon in the darkness. He felt their emotions, their profound sorrow at losing their home, their hope upon finding Earth, and their desperation to communicate. The marks, like the one on Larry's arm, were keys. Bridges between their world and ours. Suddenly, Larry was jolted back to reality by the sound of voices. A flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, and for a brief moment, Larry saw figures approaching. Panicking, he looked around for an escape route. A hidden passage, illuminated by the glyphs, seemed to beckon him. Without a second thought, he darted inside, the sounds of the pursuers echoing behind him. The passage twisted and turned, leading him deeper underground. Finally, he emerged, gasping for breath, on the other side of Cathedral Rock. Larry raced to his truck, engine roaring to life, and sped away. The rearview mirror revealed figures emerging from the cave, watching him. The drive home was a blur. He locked all doors and windows, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever before. Who were those people? Why were they after him? Morning found Larry at Mike's barbershop. His friend took one look at him and knew something was amiss. "Larry, what the hell happened?" Recalling the night's events, Larry showed Mike the crystal prism, which he had instinctively grabbed during his escape. Mike, always the skeptic, was at a loss for words. I can't even begin to comprehend this." "We need to find out more," Larry said, a newfound determination in his eyes. "This crystal, the mark, it's all connected. And those people, they're looking for this." Mike nodded. "All right, let's do this. But we need help. More than just Dr. Roth." Their first stop was the local library. Among dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts, they hoped to find clues about the hieroglyphs and perhaps the mysterious figures chasing Larry. Hours turned into days. Larry and Mike, aided by a local historian, discovered ancient legends of star people visiting Sedona. Descriptions matched the Greys. The hieroglyphs were a form of cosmic communication, but deciphering them proved challenging. Then, one evening, as Larry pored over a particularly old manuscript, he stumbled upon a drawing, an exact replica of the mark on his arm. The text described it as a bridge between worlds. The crystal prism, as per the text, was a key. When combined with the mark, it would open a doorway. To where, the manuscript didn't specify. Larry looked at Mike, realization dawning. "This is it. We need to go back to Cathedral Rock." Mike hesitated. "It's dangerous." "Those people." Larry interrupted. "It's bigger than us, Mike. We're on the brink of something monumental." Their resolve set, the two friends prepared for what lay ahead. The prism and the mark, Sedona's legends and its mysteries, all intertwined in a cosmic dance that Larry was at the heart of. And somewhere in the vastness of the universe, answers awaited. Little did they know, the true horror was yet to unfold. Chapter 5. Whispers in the shadows. Sedona's horizon bore an eerie, crimson tinge as the sun began its descent. To most, it was just another picturesque sunset, but to Larry, it felt foreboding, almost like a bloodstain splashed across the sky. His senses, ever since that fateful night, had heightened to the point of uncanny intuition. Today, they screamed a warning. Larry and Mike, with the ancient manuscript safely tucked in a bag, parked a distance away from Cathedral Rock. As they approached the landmark, they could sense they weren't alone. "Remember the plan," Mike whispered, his usually jovial face etched with worry. "In and out. No dilly-dallying." Larry nodded, clutching the crystal prism. It seemed more radiant now, responding to the proximity of its origin. They found the entrance to the cave relatively easily. The hieroglyphs, previously dormant, pulsed in the presence of the crystal. With every step deeper into the cave, the pulsing grew more pronounced, until it reached an almost frenzied pitch as they re-entered the chamber. Larry, placing the crystal atop the monolith, watched in awe as beams of light shot out from it, aligning perfectly with the various hieroglyphs across the room. The chamber bathed in an iridescent glow. Suddenly, a cold draft enveloped the space. The luminosity dimmed to a mere flicker, revealing a circle of hooded figures surrounding them. Panic struck as realization dawned. They had walked right into a trap. The figures began to chant in unison, a language lost to time. The room vibrated with an ancient power. Larry, despite the paralyzing fear, felt an urge to join in, the mark on his arm pulling him into their rhythm. As the chant reached its crescendo, the prism shot a beam of light directly at Larry's mark, lifting him off his feet. He felt weightless, suspended in time and space, as memories, fragmented and disjointed, threatened to drown him. Mike, witnessing his friend's torment, tried to intervene but was held back by an invisible force. The hooded figures, unrelenting in their chant, seemed to draw power from Larry's distress. Within this chaotic turmoil, a voice echoed in Larry's mind. Gentle, almost soothing. The voice of the Greys. They spoke of a balance disrupted, of an ancient pact between species, and of a bridge, Larry, who held the power to restore it. They showed him their world, one destroyed by their own advancements, leading them to Earth, seeking refuge. Sedona, with its magnetic energy, became their sanctuary. However, their presence wasn't entirely clandestine. Early humans had encountered them, leading to shared knowledge and the formation of a secret society, sworn to protect the bond between the two species. The hooded figures were descendants of this society, and they believed harnessing Larry's newfound connection would empower them, making them deities among men. Larry's consciousness was ripped back to the chamber. The figures, their chant now desperate, seemed to be struggling. The crystal prism, resonating with Larry's determination, pulsed more fiercely, repelling the figures and rendering them powerless. Mike, seizing the opportunity, dashed to Larry's side, helping him to his feet. The prism floated to Larry's outstretched hand, its light merging with the mark on his arm. The chamber, reacting to this union, opened a portal, a swirling vortex of color and sound. Without hesitation, and with hooded figures regaining their composure, Mike and Larry jumped in. They landed on soft ground, surrounded by a forest unlike any they'd seen. Bioluminescent trees with shimmering leaves lit the area, and in the distance, a city of crystal spires gleamed under a different set of constellations. They had crossed the bridge between worlds. However, the beauty of this alien landscape was marred by the sounds of pursuit. The hooded society, having access to the same portal, was close behind. Larry, overwhelmed by memories not entirely his own, realized they needed to reach the Crystal City. The answers to closing the portal permanently, ensuring the society couldn't misuse the bond, lay there. But the path was fraught with unknown dangers, and the relentless society was closing in. The chase had only just begun. Unbeknownst to them, back in Sedona, Dr. Roth, having discovered their plan, was assembling a team. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time was running out. Chapter 6. Unearthly Pursuit. The alien landscape sprawled before Mike and Larry like an uncharted territory. Bioluminescent trees stood tall, casting a haunting glow over the crystalline path that led to the distant city. Each step was a foray into the unknown, with the very air they breathed feeling different, lighter, yet laden with electric energy. Larry, still reeling from the barrage of alien memories, stumbled frequently. Mike's concern for his friend grew with every misstep. "Larry, are you sure you can continue?" he asked, supporting Larry as they trudged forward. "I have to," Larry replied, his voice filled with determination. "The answers are in that city." As they ventured deeper into the woods, they could hear soft whispers, like voices carried by the wind. The very trees seemed to be communicating. But these whispers soon took on a more menacing tone. Shadows danced at the periphery of their vision, and every rustling leaf or snapping twig heightened their paranoia. Their pursuers from the Hooded Society were getting closer. Suddenly, a piercing shriek echoed through the forest. The ground trembled, and from the dense undergrowth emerged grotesque creatures, unlike anything they'd ever seen. Their translucent skin revealed a network of pulsating veins, and their eyes, void of any pupils, reflected the eerie luminescence of the forest. Mike and Larry froze. Were these creatures allies of the Hooded Society? Or were they simply inhabitants of this alien realm, disturbed by the intruders? One of the creatures, larger than the rest, approached Larry. It reached out a trembling hand towards his mark. The touch was cold but oddly comforting. A rush of images flooded Larry's mind, visions of the creature's past, their harmonious coexistence with the Greys, and the devastation brought upon by the Hooded Society's meddling. The creatures were allies, after all. With the creature's guidance, Mike and Larry navigated the forest, avoiding the traps and hazards set by the Hooded Society. Their pursuers, not familiar with the landscape and its native inhabitants, found themselves at a disadvantage. However, as they approached the Crystal City's outskirts, a massive barrier halted their progress. It shimmered like liquid silver and seemed impervious to any attempts to breach it. Larry, driven by the memories now shared with him, stepped forward. He placed his marked hand on the barrier, and it responded, rippling outwards and then retracting, granting them entry. The city was a marvel, spires that touched the skies, bridges of light connecting various platforms, and the hum of advanced alien technology. But it was deserted. The inhabitants, the Greys, had gone into hiding, fearful of the Hooded Society's intent. In the city's center stood a colossal structure, its design reminiscent of the monolith in Sedona's cave. This was their destination. Inside, they were greeted by a Grey, older, and exuding an aura of wisdom. "Welcome, Bridge," it addressed Larry. "We've been expecting you." The Grey, introducing itself as Zeller, explained the dire situation. The Hooded Society's meddling had not only threatened Earth but their world as well. The balance between dimensions was collapsing, and both worlds faced annihilation. "The bridge must be sealed," Zeller emphasized, "but it requires a sacrifice." The weight of the revelation bore down on Larry. The memories, the mark, his abduction, it had all been leading to this moment. Mike, sensing Larry's distress, spoke up, "There has to be another way." Zeller looked at them, its large, black eyes filled with sorrow. The bridge was created with a bond that Larry now shares. To seal it, he must willingly break that bond. Larry took a deep breath. "What do I need to do?" Before Zeller could answer, the city's barrier was breached. The Hooded Society, having tamed some of the forest's creatures, launched an assault on the city. Chaos ensued. The creatures of the forest, loyal to the Greys, retaliated. The city, once a beacon of hope, became a battleground. Larry and Mike, guided by Zeller, rushed towards the monolith. The final ritual to seal the bridge had to be completed, and fast. But as they approached, the leader of the Hooded Society, his face finally revealed, stood in their way. It was Dr. Roth. His betrayal was a gut punch to Larry. The very person who was supposed to help him was the mastermind behind the chaos. A fierce confrontation ensued. Mike, drawing from reserves of strength he never knew he had, engaged Dr. Roth, giving Larry the time he needed with Zeller to complete the ritual. As the energy surged, the mark on Larry's arm began to fade, taking with it the memories and experiences of the Greys. The bridge, the link between worlds, was sealing. But the cost was high. The city, damaged in the confrontation, began to crumble. The barrier, its power source drained, started to dissipate, leaving them vulnerable to the hostile environment outside. With the bridge sealed, the hooded society's power diminished. Their control over the creatures waned, and the forest's inhabitants turned on them. Larry, Mike, and Zeller, amidst the city's ruins, realized they were stranded in an alien world with no way back. But Larry, looking at the horizon, couldn't help but feel hope. They had averted a catastrophe, and in this strange land, they would forge a new beginning. However, the sense of unease remained. The bridge was sealed, but not destroyed. And as long as it existed, the threat would always loom. In the shadows, unseen and unbeknownst to our heroes, a pair of eyes watched, waiting for another opportunity. The saga of the bridge was far from over. Chapter 7. Shattered reality. Dusk fell upon Sedona, but the quaint, small-town charm was now overshadowed by whispers and uneasy glances. Larry's mysterious disappearance and sudden reappearance with tales of alien abductions had divided the townsfolk. But what happened next would bind them in collective terror. Sedona's usual night sounds were pierced by a cacophony of distorted radio frequencies, flickering lights, and tremors that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It felt as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Jenny, a barista at the local cafe, had just locked up when the tremors began. She clutched her keys tightly, her knuckles white, and raced to her car. But as she looked back at the town square, her eyes widened in horror. Emerging from the ground were shadowy figures, intangible and ephemeral, like memories one can't quite grasp. They drifted aimlessly, moaning in torment, trapped between dimensions. Sarah, the town's librarian, had been working late, cataloging old newspaper articles. As the lights flickered, she noticed a pattern. Every article from the early 1900s spoke of similar disturbances, a phenomenon that occurred every century. The last recorded event spoke of a town elder who had managed to close the rift and restore peace. But how? Larry, still grappling with his experiences, felt a deep connection to these disturbances. The mark on his arm throbbed in sync with the tremors. Driven by an inexplicable urge, he ventured to the town square, with Mike closely following, concern evident in his eyes. The town square was now a swirling vortex of shadows and distorted realities. Buildings shifted and melted, the ground undulated like waves, and the boundary between the physical and ethereal blurred. At the vortex's center stood an ancient obelisk, previously unnoticed by the townsfolk, its runes glowing with a haunting light. As Larry approached the obelisk, the runes seemed to communicate, filling his mind with visions of rituals, ancient pacts, and dimensional bridges. The obelisk was the key, the bridge between worlds, and Larry was its keeper. With Mike's help, Larry began to recite the incantation. The shadows responded, drawn to Larry's voice like moths to a flame. But with every word, Larry weakened, the strain of being the bridge evident. Sarah, having deciphered the old articles, arrived just in time. Larry, focus on the obelisk. You need to channel its energy. She shouted over the deafening noise. With newfound clarity, Larry touched the obelisk. The mark on his arm flared brightly, resonating with the obelisk's energy. A blinding light enveloped the square, consuming the shadows and sealing the rift. As dawn broke, the town square returned to normal. The obelisk, its purpose served, crumbled to dust. Larry, exhausted, collapsed, with Mike and Sarah rushing to his side. The town of Sedona would never be the same again. The once skeptical folks now revered Larry, the keeper of realities. Stories of that fateful night would be passed down for generations, a reminder of the thin line between their world and the unknown. But in the shadows, watching, waiting, the hooded figures remained, their plans thwarted but not defeated. They knew the rift would open again, and when it did, they'd be ready. The balance had been restored, but for how long? The battle between reality and the abyss had only just begun. Chapter 8. The stalker from the stars, the rising sun, was a pale, milky shade of its former self, casting long and haunting shadows across the now silent streets of Sedona. The morning after the surreal events at the town square was eerily quiet, as if the entire town had exhaled a collective breath and held it once more in anticipation. Larry had become the epicenter of this eerie calm. The keeper of realities, as the townsfolk now whispered, had saved them from an abyssal rift. But as they would soon discover, every salvation comes at a price. He woke up in his own bed, but something felt off. The usual sounds of morning, birds chirping, wind rustling the trees, distant voices, were absent. Instead, there was a faint hum, persistent and rhythmic, like the pulse of an otherworldly heart. He traced it to his living room, and to his horror, floating a few inches above his coffee table was a translucent, gelatinous orb, pulsating in tandem with the eerie hum. Larry cautiously approached, reaching out a hand. But before he could touch it, the orb emitted a blinding flash, projecting a holographic image of a distant galaxy. And within it, a planet, eerily similar to Earth but bathed in an unnatural, purple hue. Floating beside the planet was a figure, a gray, its large, black eyes devoid of emotion, but its intent clear. It pointed at Larry and then to the alien planet, its message unmistakable: "You are not alone, and you are now of interest." Larry stumbled back, panic coursing through him. The projection faded, leaving behind the unsettling hum and a realization: they were watching, and they had plans. Mike, having been informed of the events, rushed over. He saw the pulsating orb and frowned. "Larry, this isn't good. They're not just observing anymore. This is a claim, a stake on you. I feel like a trapped animal, Mike. Everywhere I go, everything I do, I feel them. Those cold eyes on me." Larry's voice trembled. Word of the ominous orb spread throughout Sedona. The townspeople gathered, their unity rekindled by the shared threat. But amidst their planning, another shocking discovery was made. Samantha, a young schoolteacher, had been walking her dog near the old Sedona Observatory. She found its doors ajar. Curiosity piqued. She ventured inside, only to find the once outdated equipment now pulsating with alien technology, screens filled with alien symbols and star charts. The Greys had been there. The townspeople, led by Larry and Mike, decided to confront this new threat head-on. They stormed the observatory, hoping to find answers or perhaps a way to communicate. As they entered, the machines reacted, coming to life with a vibrant energy. One by one, holographic screens displayed scenes of Sedona, but from a different era. They witnessed the first settlers, the construction of the town, its growth, and even the last century's rift event. And chillingly, in each scene, the Greys were there, observing from the shadows, influencing events in subtle ways. A horrifying realization dawned upon them. The Greys hadn't just discovered Sedona. They had been its shepherds, guiding its destiny for reasons unknown. Larry approached the central console, the mark on his arm resonating with the alien tech. He tried to communicate, to demand answers. And for a brief moment, he connected, not with the Greys, but with the very essence of their collective consciousness. Images and emotions flooded him, the Greys' dying home planet, their search for a new one, their interest in Earth, and especially Sedona, as a potential sanctuary. But something had gone wrong. Their manipulations had created the rift, and now both worlds were at risk. Larry collapsed, overwhelmed. As Mike and Sarah tried to revive him, a chilling message echoed throughout the observatory, a voice neither human nor machine. The convergence is near. The keeper must decide. The townsfolk left the observatory with more questions than answers. The Greys' intentions weren't hostile, but their desperation had put both their worlds in jeopardy. And Larry, the unwilling keeper, found himself at the crossroads of an interstellar dilemma. Night fell, and with it, an unnerving silence. As Sedona's residents tried to find solace in sleep, the shadowy figures of the Greys could be seen on the town's outskirts, waiting, watching, their next move as enigmatic as their origins. The game of cosmic chess had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Convergence chronicles the nights in Sedona were usually a symphony of starlit beauty, with constellations painting stories on the vast canvas of the sky. But not that night. As the residents tried to find some semblance of sleep, an oppressive fog rolled in, shrouding the town in an eerie blanket of uncertainty. As dawn broke, the townsfolk congregated around Larry's house. They had all dreamt of the same alien world, a purple-tinged Earth twin, with 2 moons in its night sky and strange, ethereal landscapes. In the dream, the Greys communicated not through words, but with a series of overwhelming emotions. They conveyed their sorrow for their dying planet, their desperation in seeking refuge, and their choice of Sedona due to its unique energy. However, in their attempts to bridge their world with Sedona, they had inadvertently weakened the fabric of both realities. As the sun continued its ascent, the fog began to lift, but with it came an even stranger sight. Distorted mirages began appearing across Sedona, scenes from the alien world. Ethereal landscapes, alien flora and fauna, and even glimpses of the Greys' own civilization, all transient but undeniably real. Sarah, having done some research, approached Larry with a theory. These aren't just visions, Larry. The town's unique energy, its ley lines, they're causing a convergence. Our 2 worlds are merging. Mike, always the voice of reason, chimed in. We need to find a way to communicate with them, to stop this before it's too late. Whatever their intentions, the collision of our worlds will be catastrophic. Larry, now a beacon for the alien consciousness, felt a pull towards the observatory. They're calling me, he whispered. Sarah, Mike, and a group of townsfolk followed Larry's trance-like state as he led them up the winding path to the observatory. Inside, the equipment hummed and whirred with even more vigor. The central console illuminated with a brilliant light, and the mark on Larry's arm began to glow intensely. As he touched the console, a projection of the Greys' world enveloped the room. They saw its last days, storms ravaging the landscapes, their sun turning a hostile shade of red, and the Greys' desperate attempts to find a new home. A singular Grey figure appeared, its aura different from the others, perhaps a leader of sorts. Keeper, it intoned, its voice echoing around the observatory. Our worlds collide, but they can also coexist. The choice is yours. Mike, skeptical, demanded, why should we trust you? Your actions have endangered us all. The Grey leader replied, our intent was never to harm. We sought refuge, a new beginning. But our desperation led to recklessness. However, together, we can stabilize the convergence, allowing both our species to thrive. Sarah, ever the mediator, asks, how? A vision appeared, showcasing a series of ancient monoliths around Sedona, each one a nexus of the town's energy. By harmonizing these energy points, we can stabilize the rift. But it requires both our essences to succeed. Larry, sensing the weight of his decision, hesitated. And if we refuse? The Grey's reply was stark. Both our worlds will cease to be. The decision was clear but fraught with uncertainty. The townsfolk, divided in opinion, ultimately decided to trust the Greys, hoping that the union of two worlds might herald an era of unprecedented growth and understanding. Under the guidance of the Greys, Larry and a team of townsfolk journeyed to each monolith. Using the alien tech intertwined with Sedona's natural energies, they began the harmonization process. Each monolith radiated a pulsating light, intertwining with the next, forming a luminous web around Sedona. As the final monolith activated, a blinding light enveloped the town. Time seemed to stand still. When the light finally subsided, Sedona was transformed. Alien flora seamlessly blended with the familiar red rocks. The sky, once blue, now bore streaks of purple, and the two moons of the Greys' world were faintly visible, even in daylight. But amidst this newfound beauty lay a deeper connection. The Greys, no longer just observers, began integrating into Sedona's society. Their advanced knowledge aided in technology and medicine, while humanity's penchant for emotion and art offered them a new perspective on existence. Larry, the once reluctant keeper, found himself as the bridge between two civilizations. His hardware store became a hub of interstellar exchange, with tools both of earthly and alien design. However, as days turned into weeks, it became clear that the Convergence was not without its anomalies. Strange occurrences began: temporal shifts, gravity fluctuations, and even sightings of creatures from other realms. It was evident that stabilizing the rift between Sedona and the Greys' world had unveiled a multiverse of infinite possibilities. And Sedona, the epicenter of it all, had become a beacon in this vast cosmos, attracting beings of both benevolent and malevolent intent. While the union of two worlds had brought untold benefits, it also posed new challenges. But Larry, with the support of the Greys, Mike, Sarah, and the indomitable spirit of the Sedona townsfolk, was ready. For they were no longer just protectors of a town, but guardians of a universe. Chapter 10. Shadows and Whispers. Sedona, once a town of simple beauty and quiet mysticism, had become the nexus of the multiverse, its red rocks and alien landscapes coexisting in a tenuous equilibrium. The energy that had always underpinned Sedona's allure was now its very lifeblood, but also the source of its escalating danger. In the heart of town, Larry's hardware store, now a Convergence hub, buzzed with activity. Every corner was a fascinating juxtaposition. Ancient wooden shelves held gleaming extraterrestrial tools, while the rustic bell over the door jingled for both human and Grey customers. Larry, with the mark on his arm still glowing faintly, was more than just a store owner now. He was an ambassador of sorts. One evening, as twilight cast long shadows across the Sedona landscape, a strange incident occurred. Mrs. Higgins, an elderly local known for her delicious peach pies and hummingbird feeders, entered the store. But something was off. Her eyes, usually bright with mischief, were vacant, her movements robotic. She approached Larry, her voice hollow. "The whispers in the dark are hungry, keeper." Chills ran down Larry's spine. Before he could respond, Mrs. Higgins turned and walked out, leaving behind a confused and deeply unsettled Larry. Mike, having overheard the exchange, approached him. That was eerie. "Think it's related to the Convergence?" Larry, rubbing his temples, replied, "I'm not sure. But we need to find out. This town is my responsibility." That night, as the dual moons illuminated the hybrid landscapes, more townsfolk began acting bizarrely. They congregated in groups, their voices monotone, repeating the same phrase. The whispers in the dark are hungry. Mike, Sarah, and a few other unaffected townsfolk gathered in Larry's living room, the dim light of a solitary lamp creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Mike's usually stoic face displayed deep concern. "It's like they're possessed." Sarah, holding a device she had procured from a gray scientist, said, "This detects psychic frequencies. I think something or someone is influencing their minds." Switching on the device, a series of undulating waves appeared on its screen. Sarah adjusted a few settings, and a faint whisper emanated from it, growing louder and more distinct. It was a cacophony of voices, their tone pleading and desperate. "Feed us. Soothe the hunger." Larry, his face paling, realized the Convergence didn't just link us to the Greys. It opened gateways to other realms, other entities. Sarah nodded, and not all of them are friendly. "We've become a beacon, a source of energy they crave." Determined, Larry decided, "We need to close these gateways, or at least shield Sedona from these entities." Mike, ever pragmatic, added, "First, we need to understand the nature of these whispers, their origin, and their intentions." Utilizing Grey technology and Sedona's mystics, the group embarked on a mission to trace these psychic signatures. As they delved deeper, they discovered the whispers originated from a shadow dimension, a realm of lost souls and insatiable entities. These beings, drawn by Sedona's amplified energies, sought to feed on its life force, using the townsfolk as conduits. The challenge was immense. Closing the gateways could destabilize the beneficial link with the Greys world, but leaving them open risked Sedona being consumed by the Shadow Realm. A breakthrough came when a Grey scientist named Zarn revealed an ancient artifact, a prism made of a crystal found only in their world, capable of filtering interdimensional energies. "This can focus and purify the energies flowing into Sedona," Zarn explained. "It will strengthen our bond while shielding the town from malevolent entities." Placing the prism at Sedona's central energy point, a brilliant light cascaded, enveloping the town. As it subsided, the affected townsfolk, including Mrs. Higgins, returned to their normal selves, the ominous whispering silenced. However, the victory was bittersweet. The prism's energy, while protective, was also isolative. Sedona was safe, but the vibrant interdimensional crossroads it had become was now muted, its connection to the vast multiverse restricted. Larry, gazing at the now serene landscape, mused, "Perhaps some doors are meant to remain closed." Mike, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder, added, "But remember, every door we close allows us to fully appreciate the room we're in." The chapter closed with Sedona returning to a new normalcy, a fusion of earthly charm and alien wonder, a town once again at peace, but forever changed. The shadow of the multiverse loomed large, but for now, its whispers were silenced. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.